All right, young man, you're ready to go.
Thanks, Jeff. Call the Franklin Township Planning Commission meeting for August 4th. Call it at 7:05. And do you need me to say who's in attendance electronically?
Yes, please.
The only
Yes, please.
three planning commissioners, Chuck Phillips, John Gontars, and myself. Acting Township Manager Jeff Eastburn, Township Engineer Pete Eisenbrown, and I'm thinking maybe 484 might be the phone number for Guy Donatelli, Township Solicitor. He's no longer on the Zoom, so maybe the storm got him. And representing
Sarah, are you on the 484 number?
Hey, Jeff, that's me. That's Jessica Adams on the 484 number.
Great. Thank you, Jessica.
Sorry, I was having a little technical difficulty on my end.
And I think the only person I haven't mentioned is Ken Crossan, representing the applicant for the Richardson's plan tonight. First order of business is public comment. Being none, is approval of the minutes. Hopefully we have all had enough time to go through the 4 minutes that are up for approval. John, did you have any comments, or can we look for a joint motion?
Yeah, as you know, I went through all the minutes. I went through all the YouTube videos of all the minutes, and I put together the minutes based upon what I saw in those YouTube videos. And then I sent that out to all the members of the Planning Commission and a few of the supervisors. And I got a few comments back, and I made the adjustments that were requested, and have reviewed them since, and they all look good together to me. So unless somebody has a problem with one specifically, I suggest we approve them all in one motion.
I agree. I was ready for them last meeting, so honestly, I did not look at them again the last month. Chuck, any comments?
I'm good with them.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, we'll need to look.
You want to make a motion, John?
Sure, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for April 7th, May 5th, May 17th, and June 22nd of 2022.
And I will second that.
Great. Any discussion? There being none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. All right, great. Let's move on. The Richardson final minor subdivision. Ken, would you like to walk us through it?
Sure. I didn't realize that the meeting was a Zoom meeting. I came down thinking we could do this in person, so, but that's okay. Happy to do it. This plan has been prepared for the purpose of a parcel line change. The property that's shown on the plan was processed as a subdivision back in I think it was 19 in the last decade, in 1994. The lots 2 and 3, as shown on the plan, we're proposing to adjust several of the lines, primarily to eliminate an encroachment. Well, 2 encroachments. One is the pool area on lot 2 which is owned by Wendy Needham, and an existing shed at the northwest corner of that lot. So that's the general overview of the plan. The plan also proposes to shorten the existing private right-of-way that was originally established in 1994. We're not really changing anything as far as the existence or the previous approval of that private right-of-way, simply shortening it because it doesn't, the additional length that was originally proposed for it doesn't really serve any purpose. Other than that, I have Pete's letter before me. If I guess before we maybe go through that, I'm assuming that'll be the main thing you would like to do. But if any of the planning commission has any questions about the general plan, I'd be happy to answer them.
Where's the pool?
It's a pool area. I probably misstated that. There's a swimming pool located within the fenced area in the rear yard.
Jeff, is that your cursor?
No, it's mine. I'm getting Ken to point to it on the map.
It's located behind the existing residence in the area where we show a fence. Yeah, Jeff's got the cursor in that area. We didn't illustrate all the details of the inside of the fence, but that is what that fence enclosure is, basically their backyard area, which does include a pool.
Okay, I'm following along now. Got it.
John, any questions?
No, keep going.
I think we can go through the letter, Ken.
Okay. Is Pete with us? I just wanted to.
Yes.
Okay. I believe there were no issues relative to zoning, his first comment. There are 8 waivers noted on the plan. I'll go through them just briefly and as generally as I can. Just stop me if I'm going too fast. The first is section 22-202, has to do with the definition of a minor subdivision. And I believe that the definition specifically says any property capable of further subdivision would not be a minor subdivision. I believe we've asked for that waiver in other projects and it's been entertained. The second is the requirement that requires existing wells and sewage systems within 100 feet of the property boundary. Again, citing the purpose of the plan for a parcel line change. This plan is not proposing any lots, it's not proposing any structures, it's not proposing any development, simply changing the location of the lot lines between lots 2 and 3. The third is the section that requires contours at vertical intervals of 2 feet be established by a topographic survey. I included that waiver because although we do show 2-foot interval contours, and one could argue that the county GIS LiDAR contours are surveyed contours, they're not my surveyed contours. They are the published contour data that's used widely for these purposes. So more specifically, because that section mentions established by a topographic survey, I felt perhaps the safe route to take would be to request the waiver. The next one is the section that requires the delineation of certain categories of slopes. Again, because the plan was for a parcel line change, we didn't see where that would necessarily be applicable or appropriate. The next waiver was for the delineation of wetlands. Again, because there's no development or construction proposed, we have requested that waiver. The next is the requirement for survey monuments along the original track and street right-of-way lines. We have shown the existing and the proposed property markers, as well as the iron pins that are proposed to be set at the location of the new property line. And last is the section that requires testing for primary and replacement sewage systems. And again, there are no new residences, sewage systems, or the like proposed. I'll stop there just to see if there's any questions about the waivers that we've requested or discussion.
Chuck or John, I mean, my thoughts are that we would recommend the waivers since there's no proposed construction. And that would be our reasons for granting the waivers.
I agree.
I agree as well.
Okay, and then that makes I guess a appropriate segue into the next two comments on site design. Section 22.710 and 22.711 regarding sidewalks and street lighting. I'm assuming, since these are in the subdivision ordinance, I'm never sure if these are not applicable or whether we would need to request waivers from these sections as well for similar reasons. So I'll yield to the board as to which way would be the appropriate way to handle those two items.
Pete, I believe our ordinance states that they may require it, so it's not a waiver.
I think that's the way we've consistently looked at that, David.
So I guess we can assume then that no further action would be required on those couple of comments.
No, I mean, we would put it in our recommendation that we do not recommend sidewalks or streetlights.
Okay. And then we get into there's 5 general comments. The first is, and Jeff brought this up at the beginning of the meeting, about the county planning commission review. And I didn't realize, as I was kind of scurrying to get ready to come down this evening, that I couldn't locate one in my file, and Jeff indicates he hasn't seen one either. And I think I heard that someone had communicated with the county and they did receive it, but for some reason it hasn't found its way back. So if that's the case, I guess the only thing we could do, I wouldn't anticipate there'd be any, I hate to use the word substance, but anything that would contribute to perhaps your action. But certainly we need to have that in hand. The MPC requires that to be in our hands, or your hands, obviously, before the board can act on the plan.
Right, I guess, let's go through all the general comments and then we can talk more about that letter,
Okay.
how we would approach it.
Okay. The second comment simply says that the plan should reflect the board's action on the waivers, which certainly we can do. And I don't know, as far as a procedural thing, whether a plan of this nature, whether or not the board would act on the waivers and the subdivision plan at the same meeting or not. I guess either way, we can still include that action on the plan at the appropriate time. Number 3, Pete mentioned recommending a common driveway agreement. I'll have to yield to the board's input on that. We did not, the plan is currently silent on that subject. the reason is that, again, this right of way was established at the time of the subdivision in 1994. It was approved that way. I can't disagree with Pete's suggestion. So I think I'll just simply yield to whatever the board or the planning commission might deem appropriate. I don't think that, there could be something already in place, but I am not aware of it. Currently, the driveway is used by Wendy and her brother. He uses the existing garage on lot 3, and she uses the driveway for her residence. It is located within the right of way that was established. But I'm not aware of any other agreement other than what's on the previously recorded plan, which I, by the way, have a copy of. I don't think that plan addresses it. I'm just going to take a quick look here.
While you're looking, Ken, I guess the one reason for this plan is to clean up some non-conforming issues, and it's also a good time to probably get a good driveway agreement between neighbors that probably won't always be family.
And I can report, I can report that back to the family members. There is a note on the previous plan. I'll just read it real quick. The 50-foot wide private right-of-way is not offered for dedication. It is an integral part of lot 3. The private right-of-way shall be used and maintained in common by the owners of lot 2 and lot 3. Lot 1 shall not have access from the private right-of-way. So, I mean, the plan stated that it was to be used and maintained in common by those 2 lots, which it is, but that's the only, what's on this recorded plan is the only recorded information that I'm aware of about that right of way.
Is that what you were looking for, Pete, or were you actually looking for a like a notarized agreement?
I'm going to lean towards the latter, Dave. Again, kind of you said it best with while it's family members now, at some point that likely changes, and that's usually when these things start to have challenges. And it's obviously better to have an agreement. And there's going to be 1 or 2 other comments coming up on that. So maybe you just want to hold on a final decision or thought until we get through all the comments.
Okay.
Okay, we can move on to the next comment. And Pete, I guess I'll have to talk to you about this. When we did the survey for this, we located the stone around that garage, and there's a little bit of stone that kind of goes up towards that shed. It's delineated on the plan by the dashed line, as part of the stone driveway. Is that? I surveyed this myself. I was out there doing the field work. I did not notice any more stone beyond what was around that building. Did I miss something?
Jeff, can you throw the plan up a sec, please?
Sorry, Donatelli.
Join the meeting.
Yes, sir. See if I can make everybody dizzy again.
So yeah, part of that, I'm going to say, Ken, I think there's a lot more stone than shown, and there's also pasture areas, fence and things. So I don't know what was installed when you surveyed it or not.
The fences were there, but I didn't recall that we were required to show pasture fences on the plan.
Yeah, there's a lot more stone between the existing building and that small shed. I'll say back to the left on the screen.
In here, Pete?
A little bit north. Yep.
Okay, I'll have to go back and look. I mean, unless that was added after we did the survey.
Sure, and it could have been. So
It's
I guess the
currently on
concept-
Chesco Views. It's on
I'm
the
sorry, say
satellite
that-
image on Chesco Views, what you're talking about, Pete. It's definitely, there's a substantial amount of it's not, it looks like grindings from the road work.
Millions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Chuck. Yeah, it's not asphalt officially. It might be millions. It could be gravel. It's a combination, but so the takeaway is there's a lot of improvements, be it related to agriculture, between 2 fenced pastures, additional stone, and et cetera, on lot 3 that is not reflected on the survey at this time.
Let me take that a step further. If it gets documented on this survey at this time, and it was added without stormwater concessions, are we erasing that?
Well, there's
Are we saying
different ways.
it's okay?
No, I think an intent would be that the plan should reflect accurate conditions, and then certainly moving forward, it serves as a baseline as to what was there at that time. Different question you raise with if things were added that should have had stormwater that didn't, that's kind of a separate issue from this plan per se. So two different issues at hand.
Except for we have this plan before us right now.
Yes. A lot of changes occur when you don't have plans. You just happen to have a plan for this one.
I understand, but what I don't want to see happen is that we say, okay, you submitted a plan, so all your any past changes are all documented and you're good. Your starting point.
Yeah, I would say at this point, I don't have enough information to know what may or may not have been added to lot 3 with permits and other things. Just, without going through the file.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So Ken might know some of the history there with what structures were added to lot 3.
And I'm looking at a satellite image, and it's substantially different than what Ken's showing. That's why I'm discussing it, because the satellite image is showing, well, the amount of area around that existing shed is smaller, actually much smaller than the amount that is added behind it.
Okay, I'll go back and check it. Man, I didn't see it when I was out there. But we'll go back and I want the plan to be accurate, so we'll look into that. And if there's more there, I'll survey it and it'll be on the plan.
All right, thanks, Ken.
And then I guess my next question for you, Pete, is does that get compared to, what does that get compared to?
Yeah,
to see whether or not things were added.
Well, in this case, I guess I could ask Jeff to check the property address file to see what permits may or may not have been issued at some point along the way for that, for lot 3, I guess. And we'll go from there. We could do a comparison, and then, Ken can know that info too. And it's one of two things. Everything was permitted and it's fine, or there was impervious cover added that was not accounted for with stormwater that perhaps should have been.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Okay.
one of the two.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no knowledge of the permitting process for that building. I was not involved in that, so I'm assuming the township will have records on that.
I am happy to forward those along to Pete and Ken if they would like them.
That'd be great.
And then the last comment is, I think similar to number 3, whether or not some type of easement is necessary that would allow for the movement. I guess that shed was empty when I was out there, so I didn't have any idea what they used it for. But Pete's saying, I guess there was an RV in it when he was there, so.
Yeah, that, Jeff, can you go back to the plan again then, please? Sorry.
Sure.
And then kind of window up that corner where you were before. So if you can put your cursor on that existing shed that's in the attic, yeah, right there. So again, and I think that did have a recent permit for, that I recall, and that has stormwater as a sidebar. But anyway, I believe that was specifically built for an RV. It's open end on both the short sides, and based upon that, it's just, you can imagine you can't turn an RV to get in there in that orientation without being infringing, I'll say, on lot 3. When you had the right of way all the way back there, it was a little bit better. Still couldn't do it fully, and now you're obviously getting rid of that right of way going back that far. So again, this is fine when it's family members. It doesn't affect anything. And certainly, Chuck, the existing stone there that Chesapeake View shows makes turning that RV very simple to get in there, obviously. But it's just impractical. So my suggestion, again, with the concept of perhaps going with the common driveway agreement, covering something for an easement for that for long-term, could easily be incorporated. Again, you could take the approach, neighbors just work it out. And if somebody buys lot 3 and they don't like it, they can't, I don't know how, it won't become an RV shed anymore because they can't get in and out of it.
Pete, is that something that you'd be looking for a specific area delineated by meets and bounds and so forth? Or would maybe some language that would simply cover the fact that the owner of lot 2 has, the right to use, and I'm not going to try to cobble a note or a legal document, but something more general, I guess, that would give them the right to use the adjacent property for maneuvering access to the shed.
Yeah, I think it's really that lot 3 gives that to lot 2. But yes, I think trying to put a meets and bounds on it won't work because, again, it's, that would be pretty tough to come up with, I think. So I think more of the intent, the note covers the intent of what's there. If you're buying lot 3 and if you're not into that, it doesn't matter what the meets and bounds are. So it's the whole, you're either there or you're out.
And if there is more, I shouldn't say if, I guess there is more stone there. Once that's delineated, maybe that'll make it a little easier to see what's being used.
I think Chuck would agree with me. There's more stone there than they need to turn the RV and maneuver it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's crazy because when I was out there, that stone just turned up there and kind of fizzled out in front of that shed.
Yeah. Ken, your whole outline that you show for stone around the existing building on lot 3, that's doubled in size.
Okay. That has to have happened since I did the survey then, because
Sure. No worries.
I'm not that blind. I'm old, but I'm not that blind.
No worries.
It's pretty sure it's from the millings.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
When Chesterville got done.
Okay.
But could that also be solved by lengthening the right of way instead of shortening it?
Well, I think honestly, to do it, what he has to do, Dave, now I've never driven an RV. I've moved a couple times and had a, big box truck. You got to pull parallel on the west side of the existing building and back into that shed. You've got to square yourself up with the northern side of that existing building on lot 3. So you need a big, like hammerhead sized turnaround to get in there. And even to pull out, I don't think you can pull out and turn right. I think you've got to pull out and do a several point turn. I don't think you could pull out and go right. Again, I didn't ask Wendy to get the keys to the RV and try it.
Is it,
Right.
Pete, is it a permanent structure or a temporary structure?
Permanent. It's one of those things with like 5 or 6 aluminum bows on it, and the roof, and I think the sides come all the way down to the ground. So it is a permanent structure. It's got a permit. It's not just like a canvas covered structure.
So,
And it doesn't have a floor, so you couldn't pull it someplace.
Not to my knowledge, no.
Yeah.
so if it didn't have an RV, we would not be having this discussion because anybody's shed, it would still conform to setbacks. And we'd say, hey, great, you got your shed within the setbacks.
Right. That's the drawback when you do a site visit and you see things.
Now, is the RV a motorized RV or is it a trailered RV?
I believe it is a motorhome.
But they can store whatever they want in it in the future.
Well, we're not arguing that. I'm just talking about the turning radius of the two are quite different. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, thank you.
Dave brings up a good point. I understand Pete reported on what he observed and the fact that, well, Wendy currently has an interest in both properties, and, obviously it's not a problem them putting their RV in there. But as far as the zoning and the subdivision ordinance are concerned, the building does conform. And, are we discussing something that maybe isn't relative to the review?
Yeah, it could be a situation where, so currently Wendy has some stake in 3, the homeowner of 2 has some stake in the property on 3. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, she owns it with her parents and her brother, I believe.
Okay. So on the sale of 3, it's kind of up to her to get an agreement that she can go on to 3 to continue to use her existing shed.
Correct. That's my point exactly. And I think that's the point Dave was making. So is it applicable to the placement of the property line or the review of this subdivision? Whether or not what she wants to use her shed for.
Yeah, I don't want to get into having some agreement that obligates somebody for something that they may not need in the future. So if Wendy still has her RV when the family sells lot 3, get an agreement at that time.
I tend to agree with you.
But yeah, so if the 3 of us are in agreement there, that's kind of the response to number 5. Yeah. I guess the big sticking point is 4.
Can I go back a little bit? Something I noticed, and since we're trying to clean this thing up, is on the plan is shown the location of the one septic, or the one drainage field, but it does not show the location of a secondary drainage field. Now, since it's not a subdivision, I don't know if we need to worry about that too much, and it looks like there's plenty of area for putting in a second field. I don't know if it's necessary to do any probing, but I just wanted to mention that. You follow me?
Yeah, is that something we can ask be documented at this time?
Well, that's why I was asking the question, because it might be all documented, but are we expecting them to then do the testing for a replacement storage field. I guess if we're going to request the location of the second one, we may well have to request the documentation of it as well from a percolation perspective.
Pete,
Pete, your
Well,
thoughts?
Go ahead.
No, your thoughts.
I'm going to guess the original subdivision plan shows something relative to septic, and I'm sure Ken's going to say we're not changing lot lines that affect septic.
Oh, and I agree with that. I guess the issue is that he's asking for a waiver not to show, where the heck is it? The waiver is asking for not requiring testing for primary and replacement surge systems.
No, I'm going to say that's not quite the waiver as I understand it. The waivers to show the existing wells and septics within 100 feet. It's not to do testing. Because again, he's not creating any new lots here. So whatever you have, you have.
Well, number 8, though, is stating the plan requests a waiver of.
Oh, I'm sorry, down at number 8.
Yeah, the plan requests a waiver of this section, which requires testing of primary and replacement surge systems. Now,
I'm sorry, I was on.
I don't have a problem with the waiver, but it doesn't show the secondary replacement surge system.
Does it show any sewage for lot 3?
Or on
Would you
lot
guys
2.
like a little history, or I think I might be able to address it just by maybe some of the history of the previous plan. The plan that was done in 1994, at that time, there was an existing residence on lot 3. That residence, there was a residence, a garage, and a barn. They're shown on the previous plan that was approved in 1994. They were raised, they were torn down, and the garage, they were replaced with just that existing garage. Now, how that all happened, I'm not sure. When it happened, I'm not sure. But now, at the same time, Lot 2 was created for a new residence, and it was tested and approved for a sewage system based on the requirements that prevailed at that time. There was also a Lot 1 that we just show it as a previously approved adjoining lot that was added on to her parents' property to the southeast. So there's no longer any residence on Lot 3. I'm not personally aware of what the future has in store for Lot 3. I know that Lot 2 was previously approved as a building lot, and the testing and the installation of a sewage system were done based on the prevailing requirements. My understanding of Section 22.722.11D that requires testing for primary and replacement sewage systems is a requirement that applies to the creation of new lots when new homes are being built in order to ensure that there is a primary and a replacement area on that newly created lot for a future residence. We're not dealing with a newly created lot nor a future residence in this case, and that's why we requested the waiver.
And I fully understand what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying. When this lot was created in '94, there was a requirement to have a primary septic system and distribution system. And I think in the interim, the requirement has changed to require a primary as well as a replacement system. So I guess the question is should this plan be updated to be in compliance with the regulations that exist today rather than the regulations that existed in '94? I'm kind of ambivalent about it, but if we're making changes to be in compliance with current regulations, we may want to have a location for a replacement system put on here. Whether we want to have the testing done is something else. That's my point.
Yeah, I'm just speaking from my own perspective that I'd be a little reluctant to show an area for a replacement septic system without really knowing if it had been tested and
Well,
it
I agree
could
with
be
you.
used.
No, I agree with you. It's just what is-
One other sidebar, I guess I might mention, we did send this plan to the DEP, the sewage planning section of DEP. We do that routinely for plans like this that aren't proposing any new construction. And we did, and Jeff has a copy of the letter basically stating that we aren't required to file any sewage planning module or any of the related documents with the DEP for this plan. Now that's based on their regulations. I understand the township has its own
Right.
ordinances, but I did want to just mention that we did take that step relative to sewage facilities.
Chuck, how do you feel? I'm kind of, if John's ambivalent, I think we're fine with locating the existing septic.
Yes, I think we've got it covered through the waivers that he's requesting and the fact that there's no new houses being
Yeah.
proposed. And it's just a lot line movement.
I have
So-
no disagreement. I just wanted to look it up.
Yep.
Yeah, so anticipating, Ken, that you're going out and putting the current improvements on the plan, that they don't cause any cause for more waiver requests or whatever. I mean, I'm inclined, when it comes back to the PC, that we
All right.
would recommend 1 through 8 or 7 of those 1 through 8 comments for subdivision, and recommend that they don't have sidewalks or streetlights. We would recommend a driveway agreement. I think that's answers the questions that came out of Pete's letter.
And regarding number 5, as far as some type of additional easement for maneuvering RVs and the like, is that where are we on that?
I think the 3 of us are, when it comes time for a sale of lot 2 or 3, they handle it amongst themselves, depending on what that shed's used for.
Okay. So I guess, so if I understand correctly, that you are, have no objection to the waivers that have been requested. The sidewalks and street lighting wouldn't be applicable in this case. And we will pursue a common driveway agreement. I'll check out the improvements on lot 3, and we aren't needing to do any further easement area beyond the common driveway. That said, is it the planning commission's preference to table this till your next meeting, or what's your procedural MO these days?
Well, I think that we don't have the existing improvements on this plan. It's a little hard for us to recommend to the board an approval.
Understood.
Do you think you'll have things completed enough for the September planning commission?
Yeah, we can take care of addressing everything we've discussed for your next meeting. Yes.
And the agreement too?
The agreement, I don't have any control over. I don't know Wendy's connections with attorneys and those who have to prepare those kinds of documents, but I'll put a note on our plan stating that one is required and will be recorded contemporaneously with this plan. And I'm assuming it's probably something you're going to want your solicitor to look at and all that. So
I mean, typically, at least from the planning commission, we've made recommendations pending the solicitor's review of legal documents. not waiting for the documents to come through for the PC. So I wouldn't anticipate, if you don't have that agreement for September, that would hold us up. My one
Okay.
question is, with the county planning commission, so we're waiting for that letter, but does anything change with the change in improvements on the plan? I'm just asking. So if we'll be looking at technically a different plan, but what are substantive changes in a plan that would have to go to the county again?
Well, historically, even when we make, significant changes to subdivision plans, from the time they are sent to the county and they review them to the time that they're approved, I've seen lots of plans transform pretty dramatically, but they don't and aren't required to go back to the county. They still will endorse the plan once they do their initial review. I can certainly give them a courtesy copy. I don't think it's going to affect whatever, and we can see what their comments are too. But and if we thought it was something that affected the comments, maybe we need to make sure they had it. I'll leave that decision up to you guys, though. It's really not my decision.
I'm truly asking for input too, Pete.
I'm going to say no to that, David. The county's only going to want to see it one time. They're probably already overworked, understaffed. And if you as the township or municipality want a plan re-reviewed, I think they will officially do it, but you'd have to ask. I've only ever seen that if somebody came in with 100 single family homes and then they changed to 200 townhomes, where it really changes the dynamic of a plan. Here, you have 2 lots, you're ending with 2 lots. There's some discussion on driveways and things like that. It's nothing that would warrant a re-review by the county, in my opinion.
Good.
And I'll be on the phone with the county tomorrow, figuring
Yeah,
out where the letter is, and then
again.
I'll certainly give a copy to Mr. Crossan.
Better Jeff do that. I might not say a nice thing if I try to rattle their cage.
I would mention that I want to know that all the permits on both of these properties have been pulled, and that we're not approving something that has outstanding lacking permits.
Right, and that's the other goal. I hope to have Sarah scan those in, and then by Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, they'll be emailed to Pete and Ken. We'll share them with both.
At the risk of diving a little deeper, can you window up on the existing sheds again, please, Jeff? So, well, I just want everybody to understand, if you seem to be leaning towards the driveway agreement, what the Chesco views is going to show, that I think Chuck would confirm, is you'll see there's a bit of a stone driveway that stays. You can stop there. Thank you. They've shortened the right of way back to where they just have the frontage necessary for lot 2. So the driveway splits at like a Y at the front of the property, kind of where Jeff is wing stop. If you stop there.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you go to the right a little bit, you'll see the driveway splits. So that's where the official common driveway splits. But you'll notice going back, it meanders out and goes to what I'm going to say is the RV shed. So this driveway goes back onto that, and the stone would go up to that. So if you're going to have a common driveway agreement anyway, why wouldn't you just include the comment 5 and get it over with? Just a suggestion. I know the comment was leave it go for when you sell the lot, but if you're doing the common driveway agreement, why won't you just do this one time, have it on the plan, and then it's just there? I mean, we're not needing meets and bounds, but it's just going to cover it. But you have this driveway that meanders and now is half in, half off.
Can I speak to that, Pete?
Sure.
When this plan was originally done, this right of way, it's actually a right of way, not a driveway easement. It was established as a right of way on that plan in 1994, and it was done that way so that lot 2 had legal frontage on a right of way because it did not have any frontage on the public road, Wickerton Road. That was the purpose of the right of way. Now, originally we had it on the old plan, it extended all the way back along the northern side of lot 2. I shortened that right of way the way it's shown on this plan to about 62 feet of frontage for lot 2, which is adequate by zoning. But the reason I did it was because where they built that garage didn't conform to a right-of-way setback.
And that's a new garage, I'll point out.
Yeah.
So you had to shorten that right away.
I shortened the right-of-way so that the existing garage was conformed, because I was putting a new line through there and my line had to conform to the setback requirements. So,
Right.
So all I'm saying is, even if you want to revisit the easement turnaround subject, we're going to have to identify that common right of way for what it is, a common right of way or a private right of way. And that document will have to be written for what's delineated on this plan as the 50-foot wide private street right of way. Beyond that point, we'll have to cobble whatever we have to cobble if we're going to create more cross access between those two properties. And I understand their family and they're kind of using it together. I hope they understand that could stop if they weren't the owners anymore. So
you opened up something, Pete. So the existing shed, the RV shed, is on the other property currently.
I believe it got built on the other property, and maybe Wendy wants it on hers now, is my guess.
Right. But it doesn't conform in any way to a approved shed.
Well, I think it met, I'm going to guess if on the permit, it met accessory structure setbacks for lot 3 at the time. If I had to guess, Chuck.
Yes. So it's okay for lot 3, but now we're changing the property lines to change the ownership.
Yeah, it's now going to lot 2, and it now meets with the lot changes that Ken is proposing. It meets accessory structure setbacks. Just it goes with the other lot now.
Yes. However, we're kind of noticing that there's some problems with that for its continued use, but also the existing garage was within, it didn't meet the setback at the time.
Again, unless
Or
that
does
was,
it?
it's hard to say. There's no dimension on it. Maybe if it was 10 feet off, if an accessory structure is 10 feet, I'm not saying it is or it isn't. And that was 10 feet off the right of way, accessory farm structure, I'm not sure.
Is that considered an accessory farm, or is that the primary structure? Because it's the only structure on that property.
Don't know. There were 2 houses there before. So like Ken said, I'm not sure the exact history on that garage.
Right. So, yeah, so we've got, so is this private drive considered similar to a road for lot 2? Because where's the front yard?
The frontage, it's kind of what's on the arch. Ken has it defined there at the 50 foot, where the 62.58 frontage is. Oop. And then you'll kind of see so that's the frontage you need off this right of way, as we'll call it, is how we looked at it. And then he's kind of got that arc line shown as the 50-foot front yard setback for lot 2.
So the existing shed next to the residence is in the front yard. See the Bilco doors?
Yeah.
That existing shed next to the Bilco doors is in the front yard.
I would say it's more like a side yard, but
Well, before we make any changes, that right of way or that agreement goes all the way up so that that front yard extends all the way across that. It's, I don't know, it's kind of a mess.
Yeah, I'd say it's better now because before the shed kind of did go in the front yard when
Yeah.
that went all the way back. So I'm gonna say shortening this
It's helping.
is helping that items, though there just seem to be a handful of unique items on this plan.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think it has to be an agreement because of all the violations that they're gonna create if they leave that all the way back.
Yeah, when you drive out there and it's family members, there's no issue. You don't see any of this. It's just when you drop this on a plan
Yep.
and you start chewing it, looking at it and talking about it, it
Yep.
can get complicated.
Yeah, I don't think that extending
Yeah,
that will
try to wrap
solve any
this up.
problems.
Because we have Guy with us and we go on the solar. You're saying you want an agreement for 5, the RV access as well as the driveway? Is that what you're suggesting?
I say we can just ignore it because it's their shed for them to figure out how they want to use it.
Okay,
We don't have anything specific in our ordinance about RV
What-
sheds and access to them.
was there any further recommendation or that you were getting at by saying it's a mess? Or noticing that it's a mess with,
I was just saying that we shouldn't extend it. We were
Okay.
starting to talk about extending that, and I think that creates more problems than it solves.
okay. Good. So Ken, I think we're back to not recommending an easement for 5 for the RV.
Okay. I think I understand my marching orders at this point. So there'll be no action on the plan tonight. You'd like to see these items addressed. I think I have one last question for Pete. You mentioned pasture fences and some things like that. I understand the stone. I understand its applicability to what you'd like to review. But were you that we're not required to show pasture fences on subdivision plans, are we?
Well, I'm sure there's some requirement to, show all man-made features and things like that. So it was just to me, it's kind of an agricultural lot when you're out there. So 2 distinct fields. And again, I don't know what was added after your survey. Maybe you didn't see any fence. I don't know.
No, I remember some fences. I just didn't deem them applicable to what we were doing. So that's why I wanted to ask. I just didn't want to come back next month and have somebody ask me where the fences were.
Well, you have members who can weigh in on that.
Pasture fence isn't even a permitted item, is it?
I'm going to say no.
No,
I think it has to be over 6 feet or
Yeah.
something like.
correct.
I wouldn't worry about it then.
I agree. I wouldn't worry about pasture fences.
All right, you got 3 of us, Ken.
Okay, I don't mean to belabor the point. I just wanted to make sure I understood what we needed to take care of. That's all. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Next agenda item is solar ordinance. And, Pete, thank you for the draft that you forwarded to us. In conversation, we kind of feel it's different than what we as a PC came away with in February, the direction that we wanted to go. And hopefully, Chuck, you're able to give us a little background of where we were in February as a planning commission.
Yeah, I think we were trying to develop a when and how solar panels could be allowed as an accessory use by right. That was, and I believe we came up with 2 examples. One would be if it follows a set of prescribed rules for ground mount. And the second was if it's a roof mount and it does not extend beyond the roof. So those two examples would make it an accessory use by right. If it's not an accessory use, but well, if it's a primary use, or the proposed system does not meet the prescribed set of rules for ground mount, or it extends beyond the roof, then it would be handled as a accessory use. It has to be, what am I trying to say? Proposed system does not conform to the prescribed system, the specified as accessory use by right. Therefore, it would need to be a, what would it be called? Conditional use.
Well, that was a discussion. I think Guy's going to speak to that, but that was the discussion at the time.
But that's not the feel for what I think we have. We're trying to make it very simple, and I can't, unless you can illustrate how that's illustrated in what we have, we can't follow that. We're not following that logic.
So the brief preamble I can give, and again, it's sat a couple months with not having the one meeting there, of course. I remember like some of the sections were kind of fragmented at that time, and the discussion was, or request was, to put it all under one thing. So some of the stuff got shuffled for that. Paul had some editorial grammar comments, and Paul also had some historic structures. So it integrated some of that text. Jeff, Guy, and myself had a conversation because of this conditional use concept that still just seems very onerous for the mom and pop. To go to John's example, you know, with his house sitting way far back, what would he need to do to put solar panels? He only has a front yard, and that seemed very onerous. So it was, how do we come up with that? And that's what Guy will speak to a little bit here. And he added a section in red at the back that he felt was comfortable. Which page is that on? That's on page 4 at the top, I believe. That was his suggestion. Or this version of 629 has his comments in it, if I'm not mistaken. So I think you ought to, my suggestion would be to hear how Guy kind of framed some of that for the relief for the situation, and or Chuck, for your situation where you had a school that it wants to integrate panels at like a portico that extend above the roof line. We don't want to make it onerous for that situation either.
Well, but I think we already acknowledged that we would, where it extends. I think we took that, we said, you know what, if you want to extend, then it's going to need to go through the conditional use process. I think we were okay with that. So I think we gave it 2 options. One is a ground mount. Now we're still using the terms individual and non-individual. And I think it simply falls to whether it is a secondary use or a primary use. So if it's a secondary use, then the property has a use. Therefore, so if you're going to put it on a roof, obviously the property has to have a use.
Right.
If we're doing 10 acres of just solar panels on a vacant ag land, that's a primary use. So we don't want to give, you know, we don't want to make that an accessory use by right. We want to review that once they go through the review process. But as long as you fit within our criteria defined for ground mount, and or it's on a roof and it stays within, then it would simply go through as a accessory by right. And we seem to have a lot more parts floating around that are not tagged, they're not nailed down to, it seems like a lot of the items are supposed to be part of what we consider to be important for a ground mount system that falls within the accessory by right. They seem to be floating around, and they just need to be tagged down in that one section. You follow what I'm saying?
Generally, yes.
So the section that talks about non-individual solar energy system, that simply should be a sentence that says, if it's a primary use or the proposed system does not conform, then it needs to go through an conditional use process, instead of defining for them what they need to do. Now, we can define what they need to submit. Is that?
Yeah, again, we're going to talk about multiple things here, but again, the thought, if you can't comply with the accessory use aspect, you need to go for your variance, or you need a conditional use. And that's what, again, we had a conversation with Guy in that. The concept for the principal or the primary use was, no matter what you do for primary use, you're going for conditional use. And that kept the board involved. The goal was to keep the board involved in both cases and not have to try a variance route for relief, because that's the zoning hearing board, not the township board, obviously.
Yeah, so you're using two terms, and I'm not sure I'm understanding the nuance. What's the difference between a variance and a conditional use process?
A variance goes through the zoning hearing board, and it's you make your case, and it's a win, lose, or draw. Conditional use is something you can definitely, it's before the board. It's pretty much, and Guy can chime in on that you would have to grant it, and you put reasonable conditions on it.
Yeah, let me jump in here if no one minds. First of all, I hope everybody can hear me. I lost my power, and so I am unable to participate in the Zoom process. So what I did was call in on my phone and bring up the Planning Commission Bible, and have been following your conversations, up to this point in time. And what I did was I went to the solar ordinance that we're discussing. It has Pete's, mine, and Jeff's notes as to our discussion in red. And then it also, the one I'm looking at also has blue interlineations and corrections. So that's the document that I'm going to refer to while we speak. Although if you screen shared that, Jeff, I wouldn't be able to see it, but I can see it in the Bible that was sent to me.
Sure. If you could
if
just
that
tell me
makes
what page you're on when you're talking, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, let's first of all, thanks for having me. I said to Jeff this afternoon that I was going to be a fly on the wall, even as to items which I had really no history with, just to see how you men and women operated and how you discussed issues. I think you're a very detailed commission, quite frankly. With respect to the solar ordinance, what I tried to do when I looked at it at the end of June was compare it to what I had drafted in another context. I had compared it to another one that I had been familiar with in another context. My history as a municipal attorney took me through a 12-year stint as a supervisor in my township in Upper Euclid, which is up towards the Downingtown interchange, and went through the same process that you're going through now as appointed officials, trying to conjure one up almost from scratch. So I took the one that you had done and compared it to the two that I was familiar with, And my suggestions were based on what has worked in the past with the ordinances that I was familiar with. And one of the things I was tasked with was trying to find a way to make a non-compliant property, or property that would not be able to comply with the ordinance, find a way for that homeowner to get waivers or exceptions granted to this ordinance. Now, the difference between a conditional use and a zoning and a variance is sometimes tremendous. A variance under the law is an application, or the grant of an application when a property could not be used. That's important. Could not be used, but for the removal of a condition, either a land development condition or some other ordinance condition. The very high burden, the variance, grant of a variance is not issued by Board of Supervisors. It's issued by the zoning commission, or the zoning hearing board, which has its own solicitor and is an independent quasi-judicial board. Expensive, and the burden is relatively high. There are instances when you might grant a zoning variance because the difference between compliance is de minimis. For example, if you only have, a setback and misses the setbacks by a foot or two, zoning commission could grant, the zoning hearing board could grant a variance, but the standard is higher. Although often zoning hearing boards will grant variances, even though technically the applicant didn't meet that standard. A conditional use is different. A conditional use is addressed to the discretion of the Board of Supervisors. And the conditional use is a request made when your use of the property is consistent with the ordinance generally. In other words, it'll meet all the bulk and area restrictions. But the township has come to the conclusion that a particular use might require the supervisors to put their eyes on it a little bit more carefully and cobble together conditions to make the use as close to the use by right as possible. They are customarily granted. What the process, I think, is easier in my experience. The burden is not as high. Often there's a tremendous amount of reliance on the engineer's review letters as to whether the conditional use, is consistent with the surrounding development and that won't impact on the health, safety, and welfare of the surrounding community. So it's two different types of relief, having two different types of burdens that the applicant has to go through. And I don't know your fee structure well enough yet, but often the zoning hearing applications are significant. They could be $1,000, where a conditional use application could, is generally, in my experience, less than that. So what was asked of me was to try to cobble together, a mechanism whereby an applicant who wants to install some photovoltaic improvements, but who might not be able to comply to the black letter of the ordinance, try to give that person a path that's not expensive, that's easy, and that might be something a resident could do by him or herself, as opposed to going out and hiring a lawyer and an engineer and all of that stuff. So that's the language that I came up with, and I'm scrolling now down, Jeff, and I'll give you the page that I'm on, and I'm on the top of, where do you have? I'm on the top of page 4 of 9. The paragraph starts in the event. Does everybody see it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I said to myself, sitting both, as the solicitor for the township, and perhaps as a supervisor who's got to address a resident whose intentions are consistent with what you want to accomplish through this ordinance. And I thought to myself, how would I recommend the process look? So I thought, what I really did was I crafted a diluted, watered down conditional use procedure where the Board of Supervisors could consider it, perhaps at the permit stage or the land development, or whatever the homeowner needed to do, and sort of give them an indulgence. Maybe I shouldn't use that word. Give them an approval, and say, well, all right, so if you're going to cut down, let's say they said, listen, I need to take down a stand of trees in order to install this particular system, or it needs to extend 3 inches off of my eaves, or something along those lines. That the condition could be impressed upon that property owner to, replace the trees that were removed, make sure the color is consistent, make sure the materials are consistent, things of that nature. So that's what I did. It wouldn't cost any money. It would be done at a regularly scheduled supervisors meeting. They gin up a resolution as to what accompanies the approval, and then the township would have to figure out a way to make sure that in 100 years or 10 years, when nobody else is around, or that when the board has changed or your code enforcement officials have changed, that they would be able to pluck this resolution out of a particular property file and say, okay, here's why that was done, and here's the conditions that were imposed. So, in my footnote, I tried to explain that in 4 lines as opposed to 4 minutes. But that was the thinking behind that suggestion.
Unfortunately, I don't know if we lost Guy or not.
Guy, if you can still hear us.
Yeah, I can hear you. I hear you.
Okay,
perfectly.
great. So, thank you for explaining how you got to your recommendation on how to handle things that are not meeting all the ordinance. And getting back to the discussion, the original premise that Chuck was proposing, accessory use or primary use, and getting away from individual solar energy systems and non-individual solar energy. This fits very well to what I think the Planning Commission wants to go in the direction of this ordinance, in that most, I would say maybe all mom and pops are going to be accessory uses. And it's not going to be a primary use that mom and pop are going to be encumbered with excessive expenses with a primary use. I mean, a primary use solar system is big business. So that's what we were trying to get, accessory use, whether it's on a roof or ground mounted. And you can speak for how you feel, Chuck and John. I like the way Guys crafted this, that it doesn't have to be even a conditional use. It can be granted through the resolution of the Board of Supervisors.
Dave, I think that's what we kind of agreed to at that meeting. I think we we felt that if it was a mom and pop operation, we had the ground-based structures and then we had the roof-based structures. But there were other structures coming along, such as solar panel covered garages, which would be freestanding, or solar trees. And those wouldn't be covered by our mom and pop ordinances. And what those people would do is they would go to our zoning officer or the township engineer, present that, and that would be presented to the supervisors, and the supervisors would approve or disapprove without it having to go through a zoning hearing board, which is basically what Guy has put together in his section 3. So I think we're thinking alike. And I think the only other thing that's out there then is these commercial type structures. And that's where we want to have some more input or more understanding and more approval in our process for that kind of structure. So I think Chuck had it right. I think we had it right. It's a matter of now just codifying it. And I think what Guy did helps us codify it with his words.
So tell me, I feel like that is an in-between. And the question is, how do we attach the in-between? Because the in-between is that, okay, so this is, and we can't say words like small and large. So, so this would be used in what cases? Would it be?
Well, go ahead, finish.
Well, so mom and pop is not a definition either.
I know.
And I don't know that, I think non-individual and individual is problematic because it creates loopholes. Right now, the non-individual solar energy system is not allowing roof mounted, which I thought we were fine with roof mounted, to not have to go before and get a conditional use.
Well, how
All of
about
a sudden, if it's on a building, sometimes it's not conditional use and sometimes it is. So that hierarchy, breaking it up into these two big categories is problematic. So trying to be extra nice to the smaller group, it's creating problems again, I think.
Maybe it would help me, this is Guy again. Maybe it would help me if I could understand, and I know I'm the Johnny come lately, so I'm just going to ask the question. What is from a planning perspective, I understand completely why you would want to promote and regulate solar power for residences, which we're calling an accessory use. But it's just like a swimming pool or a windmill or what's the other, a geothermal. It's just another way to run the house or to enjoy your home. What was the incentive of exploring a standalone commercial array for the purposes of, big solar to generate power, sell it to the grid, and make money? What's the planning component of that? Is there pressure in your township for that sort of use? Did you think do we think it's a good idea that we want to promote? Or did it just make sense while you were doing the individual residential lot owners? It just makes sense to address the commercial non-individual solar energy system that was been discussed.
Guy, this is Dave Hoffman, and I don't think unfortunately anybody at the meeting tonight can fully answer that, because we were presented with an ordinance from the Board of Supervisors. So their motivation to create that ordinance, I can't truly answer, but I think it was, oh my gosh, all us large landowners, I'm one that receive notices rather regularly that we can rent your property and put solar panels on. We're interested, please call us. So I think those were coming out to the larger property owners. And, you know, the Board of Supervisors said, boy, we don't have an ordinance to regulate this or control it. It wasn't, I don't think the motivation was necessarily to encourage the homeowner or business owner to put accessory uses to use alternative energy on their properties.
I agree
Got
with
it. Thank
you.
you.
Also,
Understood.
I
Thank
wanted
you.
to
That
mention, I'm sorry, I wanted to mention that John does want to talk about, he has concerns about end of life. And I think that that applies to all solar panels. That's why I didn't include it in the conversation, because I think that just goes as a section at the end. What happens during decommissioning, and that would apply to all solar panels. And we've already included that in some of the sections, even in the homeowner owned, we say that the homeowner is responsible for
And-
that, so.
And I agree, Chuck, I want to bring that up, but I think Guy was getting close to having us explain where we were with accessory use and primary use
Yep.
versus individual and non-individual. So the original ordinance came to us as a planning commission with these terms, individual and non-individual energy systems. And in the discussions, trying to conform it more to our ordinances where we often have accessory uses and primary uses, trying to do the same with this solar ordinance. And that's why we came up with accessory use, whether it's ground mounted, roof mounted, the trees, solar trees can fit into that. Are encouraging alternative energy use for the current primary use of that property. Then how do you deal with these larger interests of coming in and putting a primary use on vacant land?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
if I can, and this is Pete, I'd like to add in an original version, we had used terms like ASES and PSES, accessory solar energy system, principal solar energy system. At some point along the line, that got changed from input from the boards. Chuck, to one of your points, like the roof mount, the A1B, I can't imagine any roof mounted system that would turn into a principal use. Even if you have a Walmart, you know, they're just generating enough electricity on their roof to defray their costs. So I don't ever see a roof mount being a principal system. That's just me. Maybe there's cases out there for that.
I agree. No, I
So
agree with that.
that's where
assessment.
roof mounted is allowed, and that's where it is under A1B. I think you said you didn't think it was in there. So that's where I think that's slotted and covered. And then Guy's item 3 on page 4 that he added, I'll call it the relief. We keep saying mom and pop, but that could still be, again, somebody who has a winery and puts in 10 acres of panels on the ground to defray their costs. That is still a mom and pop operation by the numbers. But Guy's item 3 on page 4 is under that individual solar energy system right now. So the only relief that you get is under I'll keep using mom and pop term, is where you have the Guy number 3 relief. When you're in the big leagues and putting up acres of panels and there's nothing else on your property, you're by default conditional use. And the board then has some teeth in that, and it stays at the board level. And that starts with what is item on page 4.
I'll also point out, Pete, you make a great point. You look at the bottom of page 4 of 9. There are land development plans that are going to be required, subject to the requirements of the Franklin Township Subdivision and Land Development Ordinance. which is going to, by implication, loop in your applications for relief. So if you want to put an exclamation point on it, you can repeat what you have in B1 only by conditional use. But I think Pete's point is a good one. That we and I, you know, I didn't review this for definitional purposes necessarily, other than I saw some big holes in vagueness. So if we want to call it solar energy system as a primary use and solar energy system as an accessory use, I'm fine with that. That if that helps us work through process and it's more descriptive, I'm fine with that. So Pete makes a good point. We've broken, or at least it is broken up into two distinct users. One is the homeowner who's using it to power some of his or her home, and the other is a commercial enterprise, purposes basically of making money. I'm done.
I don't have any objection with that breakout. That, I think that covers what we've been talking about. Chuck?
Can we go back to the definitions? Then, I mean, because now we're considering keeping these two definitions, non-individual, and can we go up to the definition? Because I don't know that we need to have a definition. I think that's where it gets very confusing.
Well, I was gonna take what Guy said and at least start with if we use accessory use and primary use, he's fine with that.
And those are my notes, so that was my thinking also. I just worry that I worry that trying to get through primary use, so the definitions are confusing to me.
So even just reading the definitions gets me back to our discussion, and I haven't burned all those brain cells from February with too much wine. And it got into, even when the non-individual solar energy system definition, it has building mounted solar panels, building integrated solar panels. And it got us talking about what Pete referred as an example, a winery trying to supplement its energy needs would still be an accessory use. But originally it was thought, well, if you're even Walmart, to use the other example, you would have to be a non-individual system to put panels on your building.
And I don't see the
discussion going around saying, well, we don't necessarily want to make, the mechanic or the restaurant or the winery have to go through all that to supplement their energy needs. And that's where we came up with accessory use and primary use.
Well, that's new though. I mean, those are my markups. So that would be a change to go to accessory use and primary use.
Yes, everything in blues from Mr.
Yeah.
Phillips.
Yeah.
Well,
So why not just wipe out? Why not wipe out? What if we got rid of these definitions? Is that possible? That's kind of a question to you, Pete.
I'm going to say no. Maybe you want to rewrite them, but the real difference between the two is, and Dave is spot on, between the winery, the school, a Walmart, a car repair shop, anybody who wants to just put out some form of solar tree, solar panel, solar log, I don't care what it is, to generate electricity, to defray their electricity bill. The concept was you didn't want to penalize them with the heavy lift. So
Right.
in that concept, it's a use by right. There have to be rules with that. And if you can't follow one of the rules, you can go to the board very inexpensively and plead your case and do some offset, as Guy had mentioned, perhaps replanting some trees or doing something, but it's very subjective. That primary use is anybody who doesn't, has 100 acres of farm, putting 75 acres of panels on it because they can't crop it anymore for whatever reason, and they're just selling all that power back. There's nothing to defray on the property, and again, that goes to going through the land development plan and some of the, it's a conditional use land development plan, all those type of things that we kind of so I think that's a framework that we could hopefully agree upon and maybe circle back with some of this stuff with Guy's input and that. Again, decommissioning, again, we have to talk about, I know, but that's, so even if we change it back from like an individual property solar energy system to solar system for an accessory use, I'm fine with that, but I still think those need to be defined. And I won't repeat it, but those I think are the two categories we have. Now, if you don't like that concept, well, then we have to talk about it.
So let me raise, again, this is Guy again. Let me raise this concept. My experience has been, and it doesn't mean that it's correct or that what I see generally is the right way to do it, but generally I see uses, rarely do I see an ordinance that says, as I'm looking at section 2A1, that it's considered an accessory use by right in all zoning districts. What was it ever considered that we identify zoning districts that are more commonly referred to as R1 or R2? In other words, we're trying to craft a fair ordinance that's understandable to everybody. But what we're really saying, and I'm not suggesting this is wrong, but what we're really saying is, look, for a family who's trying to defray the cost of electricity, we want to make sure that we make it possible and uncomplicated. So what about limiting the solar energy system as accessory use to your residential districts?
The problem, some background I can offer on that, Guy, is you have the commercial business, the car garage, who's, in commercial industrial, and then that would take him off the table and make him go through the process.
So
almost all our non-residential or people in our township actually live in our township. Wouldn't you say that's true, Dave? You're one of them.
Yeah, being one of them, yeah.
I'm one of them. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's a high percentage. But the other is limiting it to, I mean, we have residents in non-resident zones because they were there before we zoned.
overwhelmingly.
So it's a non-conforming use. You could also make provisions for any residential use that's non-conforming to its current zoning ordinance. I mean, what I'm trying to work through for the first time in my own mind is, might there be a way to allow for these uses in zoning districts that make those, that in which those uses make sense. Anyway, that was just a thought. It's not so much of a suggestion as, something to think about.
Yeah,
I'm not
something
sorry,
else.
the guy, you're suggesting that we only allow the non-individual or the primary solar system in certain zones?
Yeah, for example, we've talked about Walmart. I don't know if you have a Walmart in your township, but we've talked about Walmart. We've talked about a school. Usually, in zoning ordinances I'm familiar with, schools is a use that's commonly seen in a residential area simply because of the way schools have been developed. But that's exactly what I was suggesting. Perhaps we talk about primary use of a solar array are permitted in C1, C2, I1, institute. I don't know your zoning ordinances as well as I should. I'm still learning, but I could see that being a way, at least the first step of controlling the, but at the same time promoting the use of solar generation.
It makes sense because it's a commercial use. It's not, even though they're called solar farms and they're harvesting sunlight, I don't think anybody's going to convince me it's farming.
Give me a half hour and some beer.
Yeah. Make a call to Acre, see what they have in it for you.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's part of what I'm seeing is a lot of intellectual energy appropriately being applied to this. I'm thinking maybe one reason is generally you have your zoning map, you have your uses that are appropriate in the various zoning districts, and you sort of work, in that way. We're going to allow apartments here, denser development here, commercial here, industrial here, school here, municipal use here. We don't have that here. We're basically saying everybody gets to use a solar energy system everywhere. And then what we're trying to do is parse out, well, what are the exceptions now to that? That's difficult. It's difficult to do, I think.
Something I'd like to just add, Guy, this is Pete, is what could be done is there's like a special use district, I believe, in an industrial district, but I don't think that the large land parcels are in those districts. I think it's going to be more in the agricultural area, but that's an easy check on a map. Another thing that we had tried, this goes back a few iterations, was the difference between an accessory and a primary was the amount of, I'll say kilowatts, megawatts that the system generates. That was bantered about, but then shot down just because for, again, a business that has a lot of need, a big farm operation is, different than a mom and pop. So if we put a limiting factor in terms of a power supply on it, that doesn't work either.
Right. And someone, I don't know who made the comment, but when we get to discussion of useful life, and somebody made the comment, but what happens if this huge solar farm can still power a 70 watt light bulb? Technically, it's still got some, technically it still has some useful life. So that's another concept I think that we need to discuss when it's appropriate to do so.
so you're right, and try to keep on track. How are we, the three of us, John and Chuck, with limiting primary solar systems to our certain zoning districts, commercial, light industrial, and, I'm not thinking of all of them right now, but.
You're breaking up, Dave.
So I think that flies in the face against the idea that we are trying to encourage agriculture in our township. So if a ag use needs a more consistent income, then they could take a field that they may have been producing corn for ethanol, and they could take that out, and they say, you know what, we don't want to be doing ethanol anymore. We want to be green, so we're going to put solar panels in. How could we? Why would we say that's not a good idea?
But isn't that accessory?
No, it was a farm field that was producing corn that is turned into a farm field that's producing electricity.
So that field was a totally separate parcel with no
Yes.
house or no cows or.
Right.
Would they be producing it for the farm, Chuck, or for others? In
Others.
your example,
In my example, others. My example is, ethanol is going into your gasoline tank, or, that's where I'm arguing that actually it is a farm.
Yeah.
It's just producing. We don't think of corn being going into our gas tank, but it does. So it's harvesting the sun. It's just a different form of harvesting the sun. So my concern is, what is dangerous? What do we need to worry about? Not where do we want to put it?
Okay, I see your point.
And so that's where the concept, I think, for controlling the large scale ones that are just intended to produce power, not to defray your costs for your business or home, whatever that may be, those need to be in front of the board for certain conditions, because they're going to vary widely between property to property, and location matters. And then it would also put it through the land development process, so it goes through a thorough review from us, you, the county, et cetera.
Right. As it should. As it
Right.
should. But I don't want to say it shouldn't be in a certain district, because I don't understand why I would say that.
Right.
I really, Chuck, I almost do want to take you up on, how much beer and wine, and have everybody have this discussion over at the winery, not on public time, but because I don't necessarily see it that way. And unfortunately, here we are having a discussion, not knowing where the board of supervisors are with being on either side of that argument or philosophy. I don't think solar is a great way to produce energy in our climate. So I'm not here thinking that we need to try to encourage every farmer to transform their fields over to solar.
Yeah. And didn't we kick this back and say we didn't feel the need for the ordinance, and it died and then it came back, correct?
So that's the one thing. It came back because there's at least, I guess, 3 supervisors or whoever, how many it takes to kick it back to us to say, hey, keep working on it.
Right.
There was a version pretty close, I think the board liked at one point, though. But then it came back.
And we thought about it again. I think we're all in agreement on, it's just cleaning it up. I think it's about just cleaning it up and eliminating some of these terms like individual and non-individual, and pushing it to accessory use or primary use, and defining it within there, and just making it a little bit cleaner. Would you agree, Dave?
do we say we get a committee, two commissioners and two supervisors and Pete? And we try to work on this instead of just telling Pete, go do it. Based upon what you think. And I'm not eager to raise my hand, but I'll be one. But I do think, unfortunately, with the way our meetings are structured, we're not getting any input from the supervisors for us to say, hey, you're on the right track, and we'll go along with it.
Right. And Dave's not here tonight, so we don't really get a flare for what they're thinking.
Right.
It's up to you what direction you want to take.
Well, I don't know if I can say, hey, let's get 5 of us in a room for an hour or a Zoom for an hour, whatever. We're not gonna, I think we're at the point where Guy brought up some really good points and different ways of looking at it that I don't think we've really considered.
I think the primary and secondary use approach may work or will work. And I think Guy's wording for things which don't conform, or whatever you want to call it, works well for, what we're looking for. It's, I guess your point though is this what the supervisors want? And we've got to get that feedback before we send anything forward and finalize anything. Otherwise, we'll just be creating words that we're going to get thrown back.
Well, it's a big challenge for you, John, because reviewing the minutes for tonight really need to convey.
I know, I was thinking of that as I was going through this.
Yeah. Because you don't have anybody like Dave that can fill in the gaps, and minutes can't reflect everything.
Well, what I'll try to do is try to put out as detailed minutes as I can, reflecting the feelings. Does that sound, that's all I can really do.
Our feelings are that we would approach it as a solar system, as accessory use,
And a primary use.
and solar system as a primary use. If you can't make the conditions of accessory use, you go before the supervisors with Guy's paragraph 3. And then as far as primary use, what are your thoughts, John, as far as limiting it to certain zoning districts or not?
It'd be nice to be able to do that, but the districts have to be including the agricultural district. Because that's where most of our land is, which would be suitable for that.
Well, then I don't know if we would be limiting it to any districts.
Well, that's the thing, is we wouldn't.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I just don't see that we can limit it, because what we would limit it, the limitations we'd put in it wouldn't be realistic.
I mean, I'm good with that, guys. I'll still invite you over for a beer and we'll have an argument about it. But
Well,
yeah,
that's an argument. It's just,
no. When I say argument, it's
Yeah.
Well,
I keep saying this, and the more the deeper I get into your community, the better handle I'll have on some of these things. I know in some communities there is a very robust effort to take properties that really no longer make sense and engage in revitalization of them. I don't know if that is if that's what you have. I mean, I always caution clients, what made sense, many years ago when you used to do traffic counts for banks. don't know how familiar you are with traffic counts and traffic studies for the purposes of imposing fees. Nobody goes to the bank anymore. And so that the entire concept of how you approve banks and how many parking spaces it needs to have has changed dramatically. I know in my township, we have some large car lots. Those are becoming things of the past. We have a bus depot. With the way education is going, that's becoming more and more, less and less necessary. And I know that there was a lot of discussion about what do we do with these properties that maybe in 20 years are going to be, people are going to want to redevelop them in some way. And, if electric cars and electric vehicles and other solar powered and battery powered devices become, the more commonplace, you may see those areas under pressure to be developed to cater to that economic reality. So does your township have areas like that, or is it primarily agricultural use?
No, we have very limited commercial and industrial. Any of those parcels are few acres.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're largely agricultural, and so yeah, those really don't apply.
I know we didn't, are we at a point where we're finished discussing? Oh, while we have Guy, we're at the end of this discussion, so we're talking decommissioning. And what John and Chuck had shared through emails were, how do you handle decommissioning? And yet we don't, maybe to your point, Guy, older industries of energy. Chuck used it as a gas station. We don't require a gas station to put up money to take the tanks out of the ground, et cetera. Can we address decommissioning of a solar field 20, 25 years before it happens? Since we don't put other engines.
I think you can. It's consistent with other ordinances that I've seen. I read the emails that were circulated. All good points, I thought. And I did offer to Jeff and to Pete, without having a chance to take a deep dive into it, my thoughts. I think maybe we could discuss an inspection protocol. It doesn't need to be every year or even every 2 or 3 years, but your application envisions perhaps some manufacturer's specifications in the course of making the application. My limited understanding is that the manufacturers will identify what they consider to be the useful life of these systems, the large ones. And I'm less concerned, candidly, from a draftsman, even as a planner, I'm less concerned about the rooftop units on my house or my neighbor's house, and more concerned about the larger endeavors. But I think that requires some thought. Obviously, some folks have put some thought into it. I went and I did some of my own research on it. I think that's maybe something that Pete and I can discuss. Useful life has a definition. I think someone, and you'll have to forgive me, I can't bring my emails up, but someone suggested that maybe be pegged to the IRC and those types of concepts. I think that's fine. I think you pick something that's people will understand and that's workable, and that can be easily incorporated into the township administration's workday, so to speak. And I think that's all your comments were fair comments, useful. Somebody said, what happens if a huge farm can power a 70-watt bulb? I thought that was a great point, because that's what I would do if I wanted to make sure my multi-million-dollar investment stayed in place. So I'd like to take another look at the decommissioning concept. Maybe I can borrow some language from other ordinances that other townships have worked through. But I thought that made a lot of sense.
All right, thank you. Any more discussion tonight on the solar ordinance?
I think we're all worn out.
Yeah.
So what's the path next month or 2 months from now, Dave? Regarding the solar ordinance? Are we going to revisit it back in September, or are we going to do research and think possibly in October?
Pete, do you feel like you have something to work on, or to say, you know what I've heard, I wouldn't change anything that I'm writing or that I've written or drafted? Do you, as an individual, feel you have a good sense of what we're suggesting for an ordinance?
I'm going to say yes, only because right now it's your document looking in a vacuum, not with what the board's input might be. You don't have that at this point. But with our changing some definitions, the add of Guy language, as we'll call it, Paul's input, though he's not here, so for some historic structures, we didn't talk about that. And Guy and I can talk, and Jeff, a little bit about decom and the admin burden or function that's going to create to do. I think I could make an updated draft for you, at least just from conversation. Again, I think there's a lot of moving parts, so it's not going to be a final document at this point because we're changing around some stuff. But yes, I think I could move forward to answer your question.
And you know what I could do is I could try to get the minutes done in like 5 or 6 days and shoot a copy to you. That might help you with, what we discussed.
Sure, that would be
And
great.
then Pete can always go back to YouTube if he's interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, and shoot it to Chuck and I as well.
I'll shoot it to everybody. I'll shoot it
Yeah.
to all planning commission. Yeah.
Yeah.
What I thought was good about this round, again, we kind of missed a month there, so I lose track of time, is Chuck versus just discussion at a meeting. Chuck, John, and Guy, we all had kind of written comments to go by. So the written comments make it a lot easier to follow than like a dialogue with this, which gets very difficult to take notes from, as I can appreciate. And I'm sure, John, you get that and then understand. So it's helpful to kind of review it ahead of time, have some comments written that we know we can go right to if we're okay with this, or, well, what about this? So I thought that was very helpful this time around.
So in that, with that same thought process in mind, and what you said earlier, Dave, about having a subcommittee, do we want to pass it around the subcommittee before it comes back to a board meeting?
I think, obviously it's being passed around, and I think if we all want to try to do it as much by email, and I think that's our next step. Yeah.
I think put it in writing helps a lot because words are fleeting. Writing it's solid. And so usually when I see something in writing, somebody has put some thought to it and that's their real feelings. That may move us along.
So if you're, John, if you're able to get the minutes out in the next week or so, and then
I'll target to get them out.
Chuck and I can fill in any gaps that we might think are there, and then Pete can work off of that.
I think that's a way of moving forward.
And then Pete is it okay if Pete sends us his draft? Before we actually put it on the board, before we review it at the board?
I'll make sure it gets out to everybody as soon as I get it.
Is that, because if we still think that we, if we want to make a lot of push back and forth on what he writes, why sit here and have why occupy everyone's time back and forth and back and forth?
Right.
I totally agree with that concept.
Okay.
Hey, Pete, if you, I'm happy to help in the same way you and I have worked together before. If whatever you do in Word format, it's easy to redline, exchange, identify the version, so we know who wrote what when, and what I like to do is drop footnotes into my redraft as to why I'm doing something. So, it somehow that has worked for me. So that's how I will normally address a document, especially if I get it in Word format.
Do you want me to copy Guy on the minutes? Or you just want to keep it internally first?
I would say we'll get Guy in on the end
Okay,
but before the supervisor.
all right, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And with that theory, what I will try to do with the schedule standpoint is I'll try to work on this sooner versus later, couple that with the minutes review of that, the draft minutes, we'll call it, conversation with Guy, and try to, get that out, 2 weeks before the meeting in a sense, not just as, like the week before with the typical meeting packet that Jeff and I do all the time. So that way you'd have time to review it ahead of time. If everybody kind of likes the way it's falling with just minimal red lines, well then, okay, maybe we have a document we can put forward live, so to speak, for September. If not, well, then it just holds off a little bit. And then September can just focus on 167.
There's no pressure on us for this yet, is there, Dave?
My understanding is the only pressure that we have is that it's been hanging out there so long.
Okay.
But we haven't even gotten to 167 yet, and I don't have an understanding. Pete's gonna tell us hopefully pretty quickly what the timeline is for that, and maybe that'll take precedence.
Is that our segue to that conversation real quick?
Yes.
I think so, yes.
Okay, well, I think we still have Jessica here on the line. I'll give a brief overview and then she can talk a little bit to that. We'll keep it short. I know it's getting late, but the county has adopted their new.
If Guy, I don't know if you need to stick around for this, but if you.
Oh man, I was waiting for somebody to say that. Thank you very much for letting me participate.
Thank
Thank you.
Good to meet you.
So there's the new 167, we'll call it. But again, for those of you that have been around on the Planning Commission for a while, you went through an Act 167. I think it was roughly 2013 vintage. Maybe till it got adopted, it was 2014, 15. So generically, I call this version 2 of the book. It's kind of refining it. So now we came back with a different paint job and some new rims on the car. You have a pretty good ordinance already. There are, if you remember the conversation before, there's mandatory things that you have to do. A lot of the decisions are made for you. You don't get any input. You might be able to be more restrictive, perhaps in some areas if you want. I think the system overall, that being stormwater from mom and pop, is generally working okay. If there was a problem that we were consistently hearing on our end, other than people don't enjoy designing and constructing stormwater for obvious reasons, or if Jeff was hearing a lot of problems, it might be the time to look at those. But I'm not really aware of any of those. If there are, now's the time to look at it. But Jeff sent, there were 3 documents that I believe came to you. One was the new 167 in total. So if you can't sleep, just take that to bed with you. That has everything in it. There was a document with all the changes that were in there, just kind of like a highlight Excel type sheet. If you want to know what everything was and what they've talked about. When we've had a lot of input at this, some of you may or may not have been at some various seminars. Jessica's been at a plethora of them. I think some of the township supervisors were at some of those consortium and 167 meetings that they've had. And the other document, the third document, was more just, we call it affectionately the 11-page document, which is the areas where you have to make a decision, go left, go right. A lot of those items, Jessica will tell you, are already covered, and our recommendation would probably be to leave them as is. But for example, if you wanted, right now your threshold to not do stormwater is 1,000 square feet. If you wanted to be more restrictive, now's your chance to say, okay, we want to lower that to 500. Your simplified approach is in 1 to 2,000. So most people could build an addition to their house, a reasonable sized pole barn, and still be in the simplified. We get quite a lot of those. When you build your new house, you're stuck in the engineered approach because it's obviously over 2,000 square feet with a house, the driveway, garage, things like that. A new house can't stay under 2,000 square feet, but that's pretty universal across the board. And the 1,000 square feet, I don't think homeowners complain too much about, though we get a lot of people that want a 30 by 40 pole barn. And I tell them, if you want to make your life simple and go quick, time for money concept, drop it to 30 by 33, and you need no stormwater because it just falls under. And most people will go for that in today's world just because of the timing issue with their pole barn contractor. The county would like you to make a formal adoption. So this is a multi-step process where we will have to update the book with the decisions that you make. Ultimately, we'll cross-check the old ordinance. It's a good time to review your fees, your applications, things like that, that we can work out administratively with Jeff and the township staff. Ultimately, they would probably want you to have this adopted formally by the end of the year. I don't know that it's the end of the world if you don't. Some municipalities have been working on this, and as soon as the county came out with it, they have it. Others are in your position, and others, I'm sure, maybe haven't started yet either. With that, I'll let Jessica maybe just touch on some highlights, and then I think we can come up with a plan for next month to just incorporate these changes, depending if you guys want to do a deep dive into this, that's another story. If you like what we've been doing, and barring a couple things Jessica mentions where we go left or right, we can make those changes and just roll with it pretty quick.
Just a quick thought, Pete. While we're doing a comprehensive plan, that we're discussing tiny homes, and a tiny home could well fall under 2,000 square feet. So there's nothing that says a home by itself is going to require stormwater, particularly if it's a tiny home, correct?
Yeah, it's just a square footage trigger, whatever that is. If you just built a giant basketball court for your children, you might be an engineered approach.
No, okay, no problem.
Yep.
But you still have a driveway, and you still need to meet certain number of parking spaces in your driveway and that. So chances are it's going to be pretty difficult.
Yeah, but it's not impossible.
Depends on the size of the front yard setback.
Yeah, I know.
Yep, agreed, Chuck. So that's the nickel overview. Again, Jessica has a kind of a list that she can kind of just touch briefly on for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we can wrap it up and see where you would like to go.
You can share your screen, Jessica or Pete, if you wish.
Actually, I don't have anything to share on the screen per se. I am just going to the one document that you received, the one Pete mentioned. It is the 11-page document. I'm going to just use that as my reference. I can tell you what page I'm on and what section, but there's maybe 10 items I'm going to bring up that I think are more important points to the updates in the ordinance. and just kind of go with that unless you have other questions.
Where is that 10-page document? At the end of
Last,
our-
all the way, go all the way to the end and then scroll back to number 1. So you,
Okay.
all the way to the end is going to give you a page 11.
You can start, Jessica.
Okay. Want to make sure I got everybody. All right, so I'm gonna be looking, the first item I just want to kind of point out is on page 2. It's regarding subsection 105.c.2. It's the third item on page 2. This is just, I'm just pointing this one out. Like I said, the current ordinance was adopted back in 2013, and with the adoption of the updated ordinance, just keep in mind any cumulative impervious surface calculations will still be effective from the adoption of the 2013 ordinance. It's not like there's a reset button and now we start over, you know, beginning in 2022 and everybody gets to start again with their impervious calculation on their properties. So I just wanted to point that out.
A simplified approach does reset it though, right, Pete?
It's the
Not,
cumulative, I just say the cumulative impervious cover quantity. So if you're in the simplified, again, we now track that information on building permits. There's a block for square footage when you got your permit. So typically there's a file check done when something new comes in. Again, we review the Google Earth or Chesco views. And from that, we'll kind of know where you land. And when you cross that 2000, you're in the engineered approach.
So if I put 3 additions on a house and do stormwater for each one of those additions under the simplified approach, the minute those 3 additions still aren't they're not zero to back out again?
No, so if your first addition is 1200, your next one's 500, now you're at 1700. You're okay. But if your next one is 500 square feet, it's going to put you over, and that's going to make you back up and do something for the 2 prior ones. It's just going to require more volume, I'll say, at the end of the day. So your system is bigger.
Yeah, but we did a simplified approach for both of those systems. Now we've got,
Yep.
now at the end of the day,
Yep.
it needs to be engineered to find out that the simplified system worked.
No, because it's going to just make it bigger. There's different requirements. So the concept I use is, imagine if you built a 999 square foot shed each time, you would say, I don't need stormwater. And you would build on each year, and you would skirt the system by doing that.
No, when we do a simplified system, we put in stormwater
Right.
EMPs
I know.
that are supposed to cover the stormwater that's associated with that. It just simplifies it. It doesn't need to be engineered. It's
Right.
not a greater requirement. It's just an administrative less required. So I'm confused.
I'm going to say it's something more than administrative, and I'll let Jessica get into that.
yeah, the difference, the main difference between the simplified approach and a fully engineered approach is the simplified approach, you do not have to meet release rate requirements. It's purely like a volume control for a small storm, to make it very simple. Once you get into that fully engineered approach, now you're looking at, your storm events from your 1 through 100-year events and looking at peak rate release control. That's the key difference between the 2 approaches. So once you've hit that threshold of impervious surface that's greater than 2,000 square feet cumulatively on your property, now you're going to need to address that stormwater management for all of that cumulative impervious surface in the sense of a release rate control from your property, not just the smaller runoff volumes that were created previously. You're looking at it on a larger scale overall at that point. So that's the big difference there.
So those simplified systems are also easier to, I mean, they're easier to administrate and calculate, but they're also a lower construction level.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that's an accurate statement. Yeah. And I think something, you know, from the technical standpoint of it, if someone is, you know, suddenly crosses that threshold, I think when we're reviewing it, we'd be looking for that fully engineered design, but it doesn't mean we're going to, in my opinion, ignore what was previously done on the site, because maybe you can still use some of those systems to your advantage, or maybe you're just enlarging them as need be to accommodate more volume to handle a 100-year storm and infiltrate those large storms, whereas before it was just handling a smaller storm event. So, you know, again, at the end of the day, it's really about the peak release from your site. So hopefully that helps.
Yes.
Chuck, you took up Jessica's 10 minutes.
Sorry.
All right, along those lines, just moving on to, I'm still on that 11-page document, page 2, subsection 106B, and we just briefly discussed this, or Pete went over it initially, is thresholds for exemptions from stormwater altogether. Current ordinance, as Pete said, is less than 1,000 square feet and less than 5,000 square feet of disturbance area. You are exempt from stormwater management. 1,000 to 2,000 square feet qualifies for a simplified approach, and above the 2,000 square feet puts you into fully engineered design. That seems to be working for the township in our opinion, so I would recommend just keeping those thresholds as is.
I don't have any objection.
Okay. I'm going to move on. Along those same lines, those are the thresholds for requiring. There are certain activities that are exempt from the stormwater requirements. Again, what's in your ordinance now is what is reflected in the model ordinance from 2013, and that has not changed in the updated ordinance. So you have a comprehensive list already. I don't see that there's anything to add to it. And I certainly wouldn't recommend removing anything as well, without going into details of what those exemptions are. One thing I will point out on that has been added to the exempted activities list is the qualification of high tunnels now. That is formally being put into the Act 167 ordinances. So that will be in the new update and is required to be in that. You don't have a choice on that one. Flipping to page 3 in that document, we just went over it as far as keeping your existing simplified approach. That's what we recommend. It seems to be working.
And to briefly just touch on that, the new simplified approach only allows you to do one option, which is I'll generically say a stone infiltration bed. Your current simplified approach would allow you to pick from a rain garden, an underground bed, or something else, and you have some flexibility. So the way this is set up, I'm not sure why, you either have to stay with your current simplified approach, or you have to pick the new one. Is that correct, Jessica?
Yes, but, and I apologize, Pete, I did notice this earlier this evening. Excuse me. You do actually have the option to, excuse me, bear with me a second. I'm going to read it right here. You can modify the previous version of Appendix A to incorporate, or the previous version of the simplified approach to incorporate components of the updated version.
Okay.
You do have that option. Again, in all honesty, I don't know that's something we really need to look at. We certainly can, just to be sure. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it, is kind of where I'm going with that one. And it is the updated version is a little bit limited in that it is purely an underground bed, and that is your only option.
At one time, you could put in a tank, then surround it with rock and and bedding to perk back into the ground. Is that tank option out of the picture now?
It is with the new updated simplified approach. I'm not sure, I think, is that like a cistern? That's one that is in
Yeah.
the current, or is that not an option for Franklin? I apologize, because a lot of townships have, similar.
Because that's what I put in many, many years ago. and
Yeah.
It just leads to a lot less ground disturbance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's interesting, okay.
All right, there's also a section regarding, again, I'm just kind of pointing this one out. It's a modified requirement for ag structures. Previously, the modified requirements for ag structures, it was like they split the square footage between buildings and parking areas for the impervious area, and there are caveats to that. They've simplified that, and now modified requirements for ag structures, if they only look at it, getting tongue-tied, apologize, but they're basing it on a total 15,000 square foot of impervious surface. There's no breakdown of what that impervious surface is used for anymore. So that should make things a little easier for ag properties and ag structures. Again, just pointing that out, there's really no action required. Just want to draw your attention to it. Let's see, I'm going to skip kind of way back to page 7. Actually, I'm going to skip that one. Well, I'm going to point it out again. If Franklin already has riparian buffer protection requirements in their zoning ordinance, the updated model ordinance did give you an option to add a section that would require that. But because your zoning ordinance already requires that, we would recommend just making reference to that in the updated stormwater ordinance. That reference is not there now, and I think it will kind of clarify and ease the process for some people. And let's see. Kind of moving on quickly to O&M agreements. There is a new sample agreement in the updated ordinance. You do have the option of modifying that for activities that are I'm going to say, at the smaller projects that have less than 2,000 square feet of impervious and less than 10,000 square feet of proposed earth disturbance. So I think that's something that we might want to look at again to try and make this a more streamlined process for the smaller homeowner or the smaller projects. Again, just drawing your attention to that. And the last thing to go along with the O&M agreement information is, as far as inspections are concerned, this is a big one that at a lot of the seminars and workshops I was at, most of us engineers in the audience kind of questioned this, but there, as far as inspection requirements are concerned, you do have two options. One is to have the township do inspections. The other is essentially for the landowner to do inspections. Currently, we would recommend that the township handle those, because administratively requiring a landowner to do them and follow up with inspection reports, et cetera, is going to be, I think, a very challenging thing to do. But we also have the option of requiring a maintenance fund that a developer would pay into to help cover the cost of those inspections. And last but not least, and that Pete, we were talking about this the other day, even if the landowner is the one responsible for the inspections, I'm reading the fine print here, they are required to, or excuse me, sorry, I lost my train of thought. You still have to follow the schedule that the Act 167/DEP is outlining for those inspections, which is basically BMP facilities need to be inspected once a year for the first 5 years and once every 3 years after that. So that is something we do need to keep in mind on how we choose who's going to be responsible for inspections. You do have a little bit of leeway to modify that O&M agreement and the requirements of the agreement. But as far as the timeline is concerned in the inspections, you don't have too much leeway there. But I think with some creative thinking, we can make it work.
Jessica, did we get clarification if that's applies to even like a simplified approach?
Yeah, well,
for
I
the
think,
sections?
yeah, I didn't get that clarification yet, but just like prefacing my last section there. Let me flip back to the page. You have the ability to modify the O&M plan and agreement for the smaller projects, but what I need to clarify is to what extent, and that goes along with that schedule. So like I said, I think there is some leeway to make modifications, but I definitely want to nail down that schedule is the key thing, you know,
Because
maybe
that,
alternative.
to me, that's one of the biggest things we'll have to face as the township is if the township decides we'll take on the inspection role, that's got to be funded up front, which would be my suggestion. But homeowners are not going to like that. By the same token, if you leave to self-inspection, I could see Jeff having to send a letter every year to everybody who has one of these things. They don't do the inspection, then what? We got to do a follow-up. It becomes this, there's a huge admin burden here that we have to consider for something like that.
Right. Yeah, and I'm just reading the fine print in their matrix that they provided, that, you know, the municipality may choose to develop their own version of this section, the O&M section. That's a modified version of one of the two options, either the municipality is doing the inspection or the landowner, as long as it's consistent with the model stormwater ordinance and the frequencies included in the model ordinance. Again, that goes back to that scheduling. So I'm going to see if I can get some clarification on that, certainly for these smaller projects. You know, larger land developments, I don't think it's an issue. It's more of a commercial property, and we handle things like that in some of our other municipal clients areas in performing those inspections.
Right.
So
There's also-
you brought this was to give us a heads up of what we're going over in the next meeting or two.
Well, it depends. If you kind of like, again, I don't know what your appetite is to chew into all this information, Dave. So this was kind of a highlight. There's various charts. Again, I don't know what you may have looked at ahead of time individually. So a couple choices. We can get full bore into this next month. You could say, hey, we kind of like your highlights here, and we understand a lot of these things aren't changing from our current ordinance. We think it's working well. Let's just have you roll with it. And you just get a final read document. Depends how fast you would like this to go.
Chuck, John, did you hear anything that you would like to work on or have input?
We really don't have a lot of options, I think. You know, what we've got is working. This inspection thing is probably the biggest hassle we're going to have from an administrative point of view. But
The
that's
last time we went through this, we tried to make everything as lenient as possible, and we
Right.
still thought it was over the top.
right.
So yeah, nothing we're proposing that I'm aware of is going to make this more restrictive than you have now.
Correct.
But you'd have an option to say, well, we think a deck is impervious cover. I don't agree with that if there's, soil under it. You could say the pool area is impervious. I don't like that. For people with an above ground pool and a wood deck around it, they'd now have to do stormwater potentially. That would be a problem. So if we keep status quo, other than this inspection wrinkle that looks like they're clamping down on, I think it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, I mean, I see status quo. They finally got better with ag and high tunnels. Right?
Yeah, there's been other technical updates. And again, we had a lot of questions from using this, I'll say daily, it seems, and all the problems we have. When did we need infiltration testing? Well, the book originally now says you're supposed to do it, but it's like, wait a minute, we can't have mom and pop doing a simplified approach, but yet paying to get infiltration testing done. It just doesn't add up. So I believe the new ordinance, and Jessica can shake her head, I think says it's recommended, but not required for the simplified approach. So we fought hard with a lot of these things at these seminars, looked into it, submitted questions, and collectively, not just Franklin Township and us, other municipalities, other engineers kicked in. Again, it's like I said, you have a car, and now this is, making the sixth version of the car. We already had it. It's just enhancements. So it's very minor refinements meant to improve it.
So with the O&M, is that something that we want to tackle, or just leave it up to the board? I mean, it seems more of an administrative and cost.
Yeah, I think we have to get some clarification, and Jessica, I think, is in the process of that. Does that apply to the simplified approach? Because that's going to really challenge mom and pop to put up money for inspections in a foreseeable future, especially if the municipality has to do it. So I think we got to get clarification on that. But then after that, Dave, it's a legal document.
Right.
There's not much we're going to say. If they say you got to do it, you got to do it.
Okay. Anything else, Pete or Jessica, you want to be going over for 167?
No, I think we could work to clarify. If you can just clarify, if you want to have a further discussion, if you just want us to start making changes, I think ultimately you'll have to make a recommendation to the board that, hey, here's our new book, our new 167 that we recommend. I think that's ultimately what you will need to do.
I think with Jessica's review, John and Chuck, what I would say is go with what you've suggested, keep our current ordinance, don't make it any more onerous.
Yep.
And then just come back to us and tell us what you did.
Okay.
I agree.
The only thing that she could point out that we might be interested in is anything where they said it's less onerous. We probably would be interested in seeing all those items.
Okay.
Or
Right.
some.
And like Jessica and I had this conversation, we can't move on the 1,000 square feet to say, let's let up to 1,500 square feet, you wouldn't be able to do stormwater. They're not going to let you go that way, unfortunately. Is that correct, Jessica?
Correct. Right. You can always take it to be more stringent, but it can't be any less than what the model ordinance is.
And Chuck, you'll appreciate there's now a pet waste section.
I saw that.
Oh, good.
Yes. So, well, that gives me clear direction. And Jessica, Dave, if that's the wish of the commission.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
I agree.
All right. We'll put that on our list.
Yep.
All right, moving on to public comment. There being none, thank you, everybody.
I'm dressed appropriately. I'm a pumpkin. I'm disappearing. It's almost my time.
There you go.
9:45.
Good night, everybody.
9:42.
Good
night.
Good night.